Hi everybody, welcome to D&D Optimized, the show where each week we take a deep dive into one specific character build for Dungeons & Dragons 5e and go over how to build that character in a way that will give you the greatest numerical advantage for your chosen role. My name's Colby, and I will be your number crunching guide. If you are looking for a way to get the most out of your character, this show is for you. If you are looking for ideas on what character to create for your next campaign, this show is for you. If you just like talking geeky numbers in a D&D setting, this show is for you too. So welcome and congratulations. You found episode 1. This is where it all started. So this week we're going to be talking about the PAMlock, the Polearm Master Warlock. The PAMlock is considered by many to be the highest single target sustained damage dealing character build in all of 5e. We're going to talk about if that's the case, why it may be, what makes it so strong. We're going to talk about what those numbers actually look like based on your level, based on the enemy armor class, etc., etc. We're going to get into the numbers, and we're going to talk about how to build the character, what are the important aspects of the character build, the PAMlock build, and we'll also go over a couple of variants to the build, why you might choose one over the other. So with that said, let's just jump right in. Question number 1, what is a PAMlock? So a Polearm Master Warlock is a melee damage dealing warlock. You take a couple of feats, some specific invocations and abilities and things that really let you excel in melee damage. The concept is that you wield a halberd or a pike or some other polearm into combat, and those are nice because they give you a 10-foot melee range, so you don't have to be right next to an enemy. You can be a square away from them on the grid and attack with reach. But you get to do a lot of attacks per round for a lot of damage with each hit and with very high accuracy because of the darkness spell and the ability to see in darkness that is fairly unique to warlocks. And so that's kind of the concept is you cast darkness on yourself, you go around doing melee damage, giving yourself advantage on your attacks and attackers disadvantage against you. So it's both highly accurate attacks that you get as a PAMlock, but also big damage on each attack, and that's why they're so strong. So let's jump into discussing how to build this character in order to get the most out of it. I'm going to start at level 1, and I'm going to go level by level, talking about the things that are most important to optimize the build. There are plenty of things that I won't mention. I'm not going to talk about every spell you should take, every invocation you should take, what your character background should be, etc. If I don't mention it, the idea is take whatever you want. Whatever would make the character most unique and fun to play for you. Our goal here is not to suck the life out of the game by reducing everything to numbers and just telling you exactly how you have to build your character. We're just going to discuss the most important aspects that really make it shine. All right, so what are those important aspects? What are the most important things that you want to make sure you pick up as you're creating, as you're leveling this character to get the most out of them, to make them as strong as possible? First of all, level 1. When you're creating this character, the PAMlock, it's important that you make sure you do a few things. First of all, at level 1, warlocks have to choose a patron. Your patron should be the Hexblade. The Hexblade gives you a number of advantages without which PAMlock doesn't really work. First of all, you get Hexblade's Curse, which is a great once per short rest ability that lets you curse a target, and then when you attack that target, you get a number of benefits. You heal if they die, and you do a critical. You get a critical attack if you roll a 19 or a 20 instead of just a 20, and you do bonus damage to the cursed enemy based on your proficiency bonus. So your proficiency, as you know, scales. It levels up with you as you level. So that's a great little feat. Does a lot of extra damage, particularly later on, which we'll talk about. Taking the Hexblade as your patron also lets you be proficient with medium armor, which is huge because warlocks are squishy, and early level especially, you're going to be pretty squishy. So having some medium armor to bump your AC is going to be fantastic. And then most importantly, it allows you to use your charisma ability for your to hit and to damage when you use weapon attacks, which is just paramount to this build. If you don't have that, then you got to dump a bunch of stats into a bunch of points into dex or strength in order to go to toe with other dedicated melee fighters. So Hexblade as your patron. Your race. Optimally, your race should be one of two things: variant human or half-elf drow. Most people are going to take variant human. Variant human is just really strong because it lets you start with a feat at level 1, and that's just huge. This class is going to be taking 2 feats, 3 if you go with the half-elf. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but basically we're just going to assume that you're going variant human. I'll talk about the half-elf variant a little bit more later on, but basically the half-elf is great because they get a +2 to charisma early, plus some stat bonuses. And as a drow, you get later you get the ability to cast darkness once a day. You're going to be using darkness a lot. On this character, it's going to be your go-to concentration spell, so having one more cast of that is fantastic, particularly because warlocks only have a very limited number of spell slots. They start off with 2 and they don't get 3 for a while. So having one more cast of darkness is pretty big. But getting those feats early on is going to be huge too. It's going to make you a lot stronger in the early game to go variant human, so we're going to assume variant human. You need to buy your stats, do point buy for stats. Roll, however you do it, but if you're going point buy, you want to buy 15 charisma, 15 constitution. I'd suggest getting a 14 dex. You don't need more than 14 because that'll give you a +2 bonus at 14, and that's the max bonus you can benefit from when you're wearing medium armor, which you will be. And then other than that, maybe probably 10 wisdom. Perception's important. Some other wisdom-based skills, wisdom saving throws. It's better to have that. And just use strength and intelligence as your dump stats. Put them at 8. And then, of course, use your racial bonuses to bump charisma and constitution, so you can stay alive. The equipment that you start with, most dungeon masters will probably just have you do standard equipment for warlocks, in which case the simple weapon you get should be a quarterstaff. If you can convince your dungeon master to let you get gold instead of just starting equipment, that would be ideal for you because you want to be able to start off with medium armor. Warlocks just get light armor to start typically. So if there's any way you can come into some medium armor, that would be great, particularly if it's really good medium armor, like a breastplate or something along those lines. But, having some medium armor and a shield, if you can get it, is going to let you start off with an AC between 16 and 18. And at level 1, for a warlock, that's fantastic. You're going to want to use your quarterstaff as your simple weapon because, as a variant human, the free feat that you get will be Polearm Master. And quarterstaff qualifies for all of the juicy bonuses that you get from taking the Polearm Master feat. Let's talk about the Polearm Master feat. It is very important to this build. It's in the name, the PAMlock, right? So the Polearm Master feat is fantastic. lets you do a number of things. The most important of which is it lets you, as a bonus action, basically hit, get an additional attack with the butt of your polearm, whether that's a halberd, a pike, a glaive, or a quarterstaff. And so if you've got a quarterstaff, you can use it one-handed. You can whack them, and then you get a bonus attack action. And the nice thing about it is, even though that the butt of the spear, the butt of the polearm is only a D4, it still benefits from all of your plus damage bonuses that you'll get. And that's going to be not just your charisma modifier, but if you have a hex spell on them, it's going to be that. If you've got your curse spell on them, that's going to qualify. Later on, when you're using Great Weapon Master feat, that will qualify. So you'll get lots of additional bonus damage from that bonus action attack. Also, Polearm Master is nice because it lets you get an attack using your reaction against somebody when they move within range of your melee attack. Using a quarterstaff, that's right next to you, but still, that's great. If you're not otherwise using your reaction that often, somebody steps up to attack you as a reaction, you get a free hit on them. That'll add up, actually, to quite a bit of damage, especially later on when you are using a true polearm and attacking with reach, so from 10 feet instead of 5 feet. So Polearm Master is huge and very important. The only other thing I would say at level 1 that you want to make sure you get is make sure you take as a spell the Hex spell. You don't have Darkness yet. You don't get that until later. And so Hex is great. It uses concentration, but you cast it on an enemy, and then every time you hit them with a weapon attack, you're going to get an extra D6 of damage to them. So it's just going to add to all the other little bonus damages that you get to do with every attack. And particularly at early levels and against low armor class enemies, Hex is going to be really strong, and it's going to give you a lot of good damage in your early game. So that's level 1. At level 2, really the only important thing is that you take the Devil's Sight invocation. So warlocks get these things called Eldritch Invocations. They're really cool, add some fun flavor. You want to make sure you get Devil's Sight. That will let you see in all forms of darkness, including magical darkness, which is key. At level 3, you will get a Pact Boon. The Pact Boon you take as a warlock should be the Pact of the Blade. The Pact of the Blade lets you basically get that benefit of your Hexblade on any weapon, including two-handed weapons, which you couldn't do before. So now you can get a real polearm. You can get a glaive, a pike, or a halberd, all of which are a D10 for damage, as opposed to the D6 you were getting with your quarterstaff earlier. So now you're doing a D10. It's two-handed, but again, you get to attack once, and then as a bonus action, the butt of the polearm, and later on you'll get a second attack. But so D10, D4, plus all of the bonus damage that you get from your charisma, from your curse, if you've got your curse active, and from Hex, if you're using the Hex spell, which you should be at this point still. Now, you do also get, you do want to make sure that you take as one of your invocations here the Improved Pack Weapon. That's now going to make all of your melee attacks magical, which at level 3 is huge, right? You're probably not even running into enemies yet that are resistant to non-magical attacks, but just in case you do. Plus, it's now a +1 weapon, which again, at level 3, that's huge. It's very rare that any character at level 3 has a +1 weapon for attacks and damage, right? So that's great. Of course, the spell that you want to make sure you take is Darkness. A word about Darkness. So Darkness is a concentration spell, and it's basically a 30-foot bubble that you cast. The idea is to cast it on yourself. You cast it maybe on something you're holding, like your weapon. I even actually heard of a really cool idea once. A guy I read about said he carried a lantern on his hip, and he put a little coin inside the lantern. with a shutter to open and close it. He would cast darkness specifically on the coin that's inside the lantern, and then he would open the shutter and poof, darkness. But if he ever needed to, he could, as a free action, close the shutter, darkness gone. Because if the thing that that has the darkness spell cast on it is completely covered by something that's not see-through, the darkness disappears. You could cover it with you cast it on a pea and cover it with a bowl, no darkness. Same concept. Anyway, you cast darkness on something that you're holding, something in your possession, and now everywhere you go is a 30-foot bubble of darkness. This can be problematic for your allies. Obviously, it's going to make it difficult for them to attack the same target that you are trying to attack. They will have disadvantage if they can't see it and you're in melee range, right? So that's something that you're going to want to work out with your party. And if that's a huge issue for whatever reason, or maybe there's only a single target, maybe you're using Hex instead of Darkness. This is something that you'll kind of have to navigate until later on when you get Shadow of Moil. We'll talk about that later. But for now, Darkness is going to generally be your go-to once you hit level 4. For now, I'd probably still use Hex. But at level 4, you get a feat. If you're variant human anyway, you've already got Polearm Master. Now you're going to take the Great Weapon Master feat. Great Weapon Master is really strong, but it's got a big drawback. So the way it works is if you choose, when you make an attack, you can attack using your Great Weapon Master feat, and you take a -5 to hit, but a +10 to damage. So if you're relatively confident that you're going to hit them, it's a great idea to use. And the great thing about having the darkness spell and being able to see in darkness is that you have advantage. And when you have advantage on attacks, your likelihood of hitting them goes up significantly. And so it's worth taking, even at level 4, that -5 to hit, +10 to damage, depending on the enemy armor class. You're going to hit them more often than not for most enemies, particularly at your level, at level 4, and you're going to do big damage. And again, you get that +10 on your initial attack and the +10 on your bonus attack with the butt of the halberd. If you're a half-elf, you're going to just be taking your first feat, Polearm Master, so you're a little behind there. At level 5, you want to make sure that you take as an invocation the Thirsting Blade invocation. This is massive. It lets you have 2 attacks. It's just like any other melee dedicated character. When they hit level 5, they get those 2 attacks. This is your chance to keep up with them. So you're getting 1 attack with the polearm, 2nd attack with the polearm, 3rd attack with the butt of the spear. Every time adding curse damage if you've got it, hex damage if you've got it, charisma bonus damage, and if you're using Great Weapon Master feat, +10, +10, +10. Huge, right? At level 6, you're going to get, as a feature for your Hexblade patron, you're going to get the Accursed Spectre. It's basically a little sidekick that you can summon. It's nice. It's a little extra damage, about 6 damage per round on average, and a little extra damage soak as well to kind of tank for you a little bit. So that's great. So we're level 6. Let's pause for a minute and take a look at where we are, right? If every one of your attacks lands, and you're casting darkness on yourself to ensure that it does, you are doing, with curse up on a cursed opponent, on average 61 damage per round at level 6. That's insane. If you don't have curse up, it's still insane. 53 damage per round. Now again, that's if every single attack lands, and that's on average, accounting for the dice rolls and accounting for the occasional crit. Pet peeve of mine: when you go on forums and read about character builds and people are talking, throwing out numbers, they almost always don't take into account armor class, chance of hitting. And of course, especially for certain builds, that has a huge impact on the actual damage that you're going to be doing. So, I like to take a look at, well, let's account for armor class. At a 15 armor class at level 6, which is a fairly average, not super strong, but not particularly weak opponent that you'll probably be facing at this level. On average, you'll be doing 42 to a cursed target and 37 otherwise per round. Still phenomenal, right? 42 damage per round on average, or 37. So speaking of enemy armor class, question is going to come up. Do you always leave your Great Weapon Master feat on, or do you sometimes turn it off and opt not to take that -5 to hit penalty in order to benefit from the +10 to damage when you do hit? The short answer is yes, you do. And if you look at the numbers, if you crunch the numbers, that threshold is right about an AC of 18. So if your enemy has an AC of 18 or higher, probably don't want to use the Great Weapon Master feat. Don't take the -5 and the +10. Just make it a regular attack. On average, you will do more damage. But this kind of highlights the reason why it's better to use Darkness than Hex, right? Because the +10 to damage is not a die roll. It is just straight 10 damage. +10 to damage is way better than a d6 of damage that you might get if somebody is hexed and you're using your concentration for hex. Instead, you want Darkness to give yourself advantage, so you're more frequently landing those big, huge hits. Overall, again, when you crunch the numbers, do the math, you're going to do more damage, particularly at 14, 15 AC and beyond, when you're using Darkness on yourself to give yourself advantage on those attacks. I think at some point I'll probably post a graph and the stats and the data and things to our website so that people can look and see, how the damage arc kind of goes depending on the enemy armor class. But you'll notice that at the higher ACs, enemy ACs, Darkness is pretty much always outperforming Hex with this build. Okay, from here on out, things will move a little more quickly. So at level 7, you want to make sure that you pick up your Shadow of Moil spell. That's a 4th level spell you finally get now at level 7. Basically, Shadow of Moil operates similar to Darkness, except for it's truly just on yourself. So it's not a big 30-foot bubble messing up your friends trying to attack the same target as you. So you can drop Darkness spell if you want to free it up for a different spell. And you can also drop the Devil's Sight invocation if you want to pick up some other cool invocation. Because you're not necessarily in darkness. You're just heavily obscured, so your enemies still can't see you. It's the same as, the same advantage for you, disadvantage for them as if you were in darkness. But it's not technically darkness, so you don't. Most DM rulings don't indicate that you have to have Devil's Sight. Check with your DM to make sure. Also, it has a nice little added bonus that if you do get hit by an enemy in melee, I believe it is, then they are going to take 2d8 of damage. I believe it's 2d8. So a little extra damage burst for them. Speaking of little extra damage, something that I haven't really talked about yet, but that you want to keep in mind, as a Polearm master feat using character who's wielding a polearm, again, you have range, or at least reach, that is, on your melee attacks. So the idea is for you to move up to, within 10 feet of somebody, make an attack, and then you could even back off 5 feet if you wanted to. And then if they decide to attack you on their turn, when they move into your range, boom, you get an extra attack. And again, you get to add your charisma, your Great Weapon Master feat, etc., etc. It's a pretty high damage attack. The same goes for if somebody's trying to run past you and get to, somebody in the back line or something like that. You can, if you haven't used your reaction, take a jab at them instead, do some damage, and maybe discourage enemy movement. So it can be a nice little control and extra damage feature. So anyway, get Shadow of Moil. At level 8, finally, if we're variant human anyway, we get to put points into charisma. So now your charisma is going to be 18. That's nice. A little extra damage, a little extra to hit. At level 9, at level 8, if you're a half-elf, you're just picking up Great Weapon Master feat. So again, you're still behind. At level 9, let's take another pause and see where we're at numbers-wise. At level 9, if everything lands on a cursed target, you're doing 70 damage per round. 70 damage per round at level 9. 58 on a non-cursed target, again, if everything lands. Now, obviously, not everything you attack is going to be a 10 armor class, and you're just going to be hitting every time. So on a 16 armor class, that drops significantly, but still it's 47 damage per round on average on a cursed target, and 39 otherwise. Still very, very strong, about as good as anything out there outside of, high-level spells, etc. At level 12, we'll skip ahead a little bit. At level 12, you're going to take the Life Drinker invocation. That is huge. You get to double your charisma bonus now on every melee attack. And at level 12, ding, 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 your charisma is maxed for a variant human. So we're talking an extra +5 to damage on every single hit. That's big. And if you are a drow half elf at level 12, instead of taking a charisma bonus, you are going to take yet another feat, your third feat. You are going to be taking Elven Accuracy. And I need to pause for a minute and discuss that. This is why, up until this point, the variant human build is about 6 damage per round higher on average because of the head start that they got than the half-elf. But at level 12 is where the half-elf catches up and surpasses the human and will stay ahead for the rest of the life of the character. Elven Accuracy, for those who don't know, basically what it does is it allows you to roll an extra die every time you are making an attack with advantage. And since you are pretty much always making an attack with advantage, thanks to your Shadow of Moil, Darkness, every time you roll, instead of rolling 2 dice, like typical advantage, you get to roll 3. And again, the bonus that will give you to your critical hits, as well as just to your accuracy to hit, is huge. And when each hit hits so hard, it's just very, very strong. The question that you have to ask yourself is, how much of the campaign that I'm playing is going to be pre-level 12 versus post-level 12? You don't see a lot of, high-level adventures out there, at least not official D&D content. That's slowly changing, but for a lot of characters, you may not even get to level 12, in which case I would say go variant human all the way. But if you are confident that you're going to play well beyond, and or you really like half-elves, and or maybe you're doing some homebrew and maybe you're doing a one-shot and you're starting at level 12 or beyond, who knows? Just know that numerically, the half-elf is superior from this point on because they get that extra D20 every time they get advantage. Also, the nice thing is, since you went half-elf and you bought 15 decks when you were first creating your character, half-elves get +2, or sorry, I said decks, I meant charisma. You get +2 charisma. So you bought up to 15 charisma, you got +2, so you've been at 17 charisma this whole time. This feat, Elven Accuracy, lets you do a +1 into charisma. So you are at 18, so you do get that +4 bonus now that an 18 ability score gives you. So you're not too far behind. You're really just 2 charisma behind the human at this point. But you've got Elven Accuracy, which is really great. At level 13, pause. Let's look at the numbers. At this point, if everything lands, if every attack lands, and the target is cursed, you are doing 94 damage per round. 94. You are this close to 100 DPR, and you're going to hit 100. That's average, right? So you're gonna pass 100 consistently. 79 average damage per round if a target is not cursed and everything lands. So against, let's say, we're going to bump the AC, right? Every time we pause like this, we bump the AC a little bit because your enemies are getting more and more challenging. So on a 17 AC, you're doing 65 damage per round to a cursed target and 54 otherwise. Still amazing. Really, really good. All right. Coming down the home stretch here. Level 14. At level 14, it is God mode enabled. Curse now lasts for basically an entire combat encounter. Previously, it was just usable once per short rest on a single enemy. Now it's usable once per short rest for an entire minute. You cast it, and then after that person dies, as a bonus action, transfer to somebody else. At level 14, it's incredibly difficult to find any other class build in D&D 5e that can compete for damage over an entire fight with the PAMlock, especially without spending, massive limited resources, very high level spell slots, or for fighters, their action surges, etc., etc. You do so much damage. It's ridiculous. At level 16, again, if you're variant human, you're probably taking the Warcaster feat. You're maxed on your charisma. It would be nice to get some additional constitution in there, but really you want Warcaster for a couple of reasons. Primarily because it's going to give you advantage on your concentration saves. Remember, if you have concentration on a spell, which as this build you always should in combat, every time you get hit, you have to make a concentration check to see if you actually maintain concentration. And you're going to find one of your biggest frustrations playing this character is when you lose concentration, particularly because you don't have a lot of spell slots. So being able to have advantage on that is huge. And in fact, it's so big that I'd almost consider taking it, back at level 12 or even level 8. So something to consider. But it also has a nice little perk of if somebody leaves your range, if you get an opportunity attack against somebody, you can cast a spell on them. So that can be any spell. One that you would probably want to consider it is Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade, which basically lets you take a melee attack as the spell, and then they do extra damage on top of that. And you can read about Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade. I won't get into the details here, but those are really great to use if you have the Warcaster feat especially. If you are a half-elf, you're just going to max your charisma at this point at 16. Level 17, this is the last thing that we'll talk about, the last level we'll talk about. So take a look at damage at level 17. And it doesn't really go up from here, so we don't need to worry about, 20. And who plays the game at level 20 anyway? So you have broken the Centennial Barrier. On average, you are doing 101 damage per round if everything hits. And I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna stop differentiating between cursed and not cursed because most of the time your target's gonna have curse on it. Again, it's only 1 minute per short rest. So sure, there will, depending on your dungeon master and how often they let you rest, you won't necessarily have it up for every single combat, but probably every other, right? And at the worst, and that's so much damage. It will be, about 6 damage per round less if you don't have curse up. 101 DPR. Against an enemy of 18 armor class, which at level 17, that's pretty average. It's still crazy. 73 damage per round against 18 AC. Going to be really hard to find somebody that's that high. And a half elf with elven accuracy is going to be even higher. I'll put the numbers up on the graph, assuming I get to that. So final thoughts on the class. Again, elf versus human. The variant human gets off to a quicker start. The half elf is going to be doing about 6 damage per round less, but after level 12, they're a lot better, especially at higher armor class. But regardless, again, at level 17, 101 damage per round to a 10 armor class enemy, you are just blowing stuff up. I mean, it's insane. You are a big blob of darkness roaming around the field of battle, just swallowing bad guys up and spitting them out. And it's a fun concept, to imagine your enemies seeing this blob of darkness come towards them and just, and a helmet or a piece of armor or something goes flying. It's just a great fun class that's very, very, very powerful. One of, if not the best, sustainable damage per round builds out there, especially after level 14 when curse applies for a whole minute. I will end with just some DM tips. So if you're a dungeon master and first of all, if you're a player, don't let your dungeon masters listen to this. If you're a dungeon master and you're a little frustrated because you've got a lot of PAMlocks in your parties and they're really strong, a few tips for how to deal with them. Things that you probably know, but maybe some that you haven't considered. Obviously, anything you can do to keep combat going frequently or prolonged so that they can't take advantage of those concentration spells for an entire combat or for every combat, right? Again, warlocks have very limited spell slots, but they renew on a short rest. So if you can keep them from short resting and get them to a place where they're running out of slots, now suddenly, it's like, well, I don't have any spell slots, so I don't have darkness, therefore I'm squishier because they don't have disadvantage on attacks against me, and I'm not going to hit as often, so I probably shouldn't use my Great Weapon Master feat, so they're just not going to be hitting as hard. They're going to be squishier. They're going to have to play more cautiously if they're running out of spell slots. Of course, enemies that have True Sight or Devil Sight themselves or Blind Sight, where they don't need vision in order to hit, they're not going to have disadvantage on attacks, and the character isn't going to have advantage on attacks against them because doesn't matter that they can't be seen. The character doesn't need to see if they have blind sight, for example. So those are going to be really strong against these builds, those types of enemies. And of course, enemies with area attacks, AoE, area of effect attacks or spells. The PAMlock doesn't have a real high dex. So a fireball, for example, where you've got to be making a dex save, it has a pretty high likelihood of landing. They're going to take big damage. They might lose their concentration, right? So that's ways to kind of temper the PAMlock. And of course, good old-fashioned Dispel Magic. Dispel Magic will kill that darkness or Shadow of Moil or what have you, and burn up those very precious and limited spell slot resources. So that does it for the PAMlock. That's our show for the week. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate having you. Tune in next week as we take a look at an entirely new build for a different character. And we're going to be looking at sustained damage builds, but we're also going to be looking at some Nova or Burst damage builds. We're going to be looking at tanky control type characters, a variety. So tune in next week. Of course, do all of the things. Subscribe, like, share, follow, leave a review, etc. On whatever format that you're consuming this content. I would really appreciate that. And finally, feel free to email me. If you have questions, concerns, comments, email to dndoptimized@gmail.com. That's D, the letter N, D, optimized@gmail.com. If you want to correct mistakes you feel I've made in my math, And for that matter, if you've got a build, a specific character build that you'd like to see me do a deep dive on and, talk about how it compares to others that we're taking a look at, I will do my best to get it in the show. Just make sure you include details about, what that character build actually entails, and I'll do my best to try and optimize it for you. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon. Hey, guys. So we're one episode in, and I already have to have a postscript about mistakes that I made, which I guess we should get used to because I'm sure this will happen all the time. But as I was going through the math and rewatching the show and cutting it, getting it ready, making my graphs, etc., I found a few mistakes that I needed to correct. First of all, anytime that I say every hit lands, what I really should have said is at 10 enemy AC, because that's what I was doing the calculations for. And at 10 enemy AC, not every hit is going to land, particularly in the early levels and if you're using that Great Weapon Master feature. So keep that in mind. Also, believe it or not, I actually undersold the PAMlock's damage per round. I made a couple of mistakes. One, I wasn't accounting for the +1 to hit and damage that you get from the improved packed weapon, which makes a significant difference. And also, I wanted to be a little more precise with the Spectre damage. I said it was about 6 damage per round. In reality, it's a little better than that at lower ACs, a little worse once you get way up into the higher ACs. So I modified that, and in the end, it's the difference of about 5 to 12 damage per round, depending on the level. So again, check out the math. I'm going to have links to it with graphs and things, a spreadsheet, in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast, or in the video description if you're watching this on YouTube, which brings me to my next point. Again, if it wasn't clear, if you prefer to listen to this via podcast, you're watching a YouTube video and you'd rather listen, feel free, just search for D&D Optimized wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening to the podcast and you'd like to see what I look like, or just watch a YouTube video, just search for D&D Optimized on YouTube. We've got a channel there. We also have social media pages: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So if you'd rather use one of those social media platforms to interact with us, we'd love it. Go ahead and follow us there. And if you want to use that to interact with us, to ask about doing a deep dive on a particular build, or ask questions, or correct a mistake that I've made in my math in a previous show or something like that, feel free. We'll make announcements every time we've got a new episode available on our social media platforms. So I believe that's it. Thanks again, and hope to see you in the next show.